not all plant foods are created equal. If you're going to eat the rainbow, you will pay a price because some plant foods are more aggressive than others. Most people are destroying their brains from the inside out without realizing it and then wondering why they don't feel well. 31 of his most treatment-resistant patients with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, severe major depression, by week 3, all of them had improved.
Welcome to the Plant-Free MD podcast with Dr. Anthony Chaffee, where we discuss diet and nutrition and how this affects health and chronic disease, and show you how you can use this to optimize your health and happiness, both mentally and physically. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Plant-Free MD podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Chaffee, and today I have a very special guest I'm very excited to speak to, Dr. Georgia Ede, who is a psychiatrist and been doing absolutely fantastic research into the world of mental health and really reshaping the landscape of how we think about mental health. Dr. Ede, thank you so much for joining.
Thanks very much for inviting me. It's nice to be here.
Yeah. So I'm sure I've spoken about you a number of times, and I know that a lot of people do know who you are, but for people who don't know who you are, can you tell us a bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure. So I'm a psychiatrist. I've been based in Massachusetts in the United States, and I've been practicing psychiatry for about 25 years. And for the past 15 years or so, have really focused on the relationship between nutrition and mental health. So I use a lot of dietary interventions in my practice. Really, the cornerstone of my practice is the ketogenic diet and also carnivore versions of a ketogenic diet. But I use a variety of dietary interventions in my work, and I also do research and teach and just published a book.
Yeah, well, that's great. So, well, tell us a bit about that, but also how you came across that in the first place, because obviously this isn't a typical thing for doctors to be prescribing ketogenics, and especially not carnivore diets. Certainly not yet.
Right.
Yeah.
So, well, I mean, I think like a lot of doctors who come to use nutrition in their practice, they often stumble into it through their own health journeys, and that's definitely what happened to me. So, as you know, so in medical school, 4 years of medical school, not a single, I think maybe 2 or 3 hours of nutrition education, but nothing about food in the brain. And then 4 hours of psychiatry residency, we didn't talk about food once. So it actually had never crossed my mind that food might have an impact on our mental health until I changed my own diet for other reasons, having nothing to do with mental health, and noticed that my mental health improved. And rather strangely, I actually never really thought there was much wrong with my mental health until it got better. And that, I mean, I think that's probably true for a lot of people. They probably think, this is, I think our expectations of our mental health are pretty low. We kind of expect to sort of run out of steam at the end of the day. We expect to get anxious, very anxious on Sunday nights before Monday morning work starts. We expect to be easily overwhelmed. We expect to have, difficulty concentrating and getting a lot done. So for me, it was really got my attention. I thought, when I'd kind of stumbled into, by trial and error, this kind of upside down diet, which was mostly meat, I thought, this diet seems to be good for the brain. And, maybe this could be helpful to all of my patients who, most of them aren't getting better enough. And a lot of my patients, had a lot of the same issues that I was coming across when I was in my early 40s, things like, chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia and IBS and migraines. And I had no idea how to help my patients with those issues. And when my own issues resolved by turning my diet around, that I thought, I need to study nutrition. I need to understand whether this diet is going to kill me or whether it's the diet that's going to be useful for my patients. And that's when I started studying nutrition in earnest, really, for the first time.
Okay. So were you sort of self-taught? Did you take courses, or really just delve into the research yourself?
Well, I started by delving into the research myself. And as you know, scratch the surface of just about any nutrition study that's trying to convince you that a particular way of eating is good for you. There's no science behind the conventional recommendations, sort of recommendations to eat, more plants than animals, or, lots of whole grains, or low cholesterol, low fat. All of those recommendations they're not based in any science. So I studied a lot independently for 2 or 3 years. And then, I was working at Harvard at the time. And so I I also enrolled in a graduate course at the Harvard School of Public Health in Human Nutrition, and there are two courses. There's a sort of Nutrition 1 and Nutrition 2 for graduate students. These are largely for students who are going on to become to get a master's in public health, and it was taught by very prestigious Harvard nutrition experts. And so I took that one semester course and was really frustrated by what I was learning, because most of it was based in this kind of epidemiological guesswork and these questionnaire-based studies. And so I didn't feel like I was really learning what I wanted to learn. So I did not take the second course. I didn't think that would be worth my time or money. And then I continued studying independently after that.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good thing. Yeah, I think a lot of nutritional, people talk about how, like you say, we only get about an hour or two of nutritional education in medical school. People say, oh, well, that's the problem. I'm like, I don't know if that might actually be okay, because you'd probably be taught the wrong things, and you probably get even more indoctrinated and down the wrong path. And because they wouldn't actually go into as much detail, a detailed view that you did. You can see this is just epidemiology. This is just surveys. They're just going to be, just telling you, oh, well, these studies have shown blah, 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 blah. I probably wouldn't have gone into a lot of depth, because it certainly wouldn't have had a whole year worth of coursework, graduate level coursework. You wouldn't have that time available in medical school. So it would be even more superficial, and could even be worse indoctrination into the wrong sort of pathways for nutrition.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought of it that way, but I think that it probably was a blessing in disguise that I didn't get more nutrition education in medical school or residency, because it would have largely been a miseducation that I would have then had to undo. And the more you learn about the wrong information, the harder it is to unlearn it. So I think you're making a really good point.
Yeah. I grew up in Kirkland, Washington, and there was a school named Bastyr, which they had apparently the top nutrition and naturopathic graduate program in the country, private school there. And I remember speaking to many students there when I was at University of Washington, and just friends through friends and things like that. And they were all vegan, all plant-based, all pushing that. And I remember just thinking, like, well, that's obviously silly. We're apex predators. So obviously we need meat. We've always been eating meat. You can't get B12 and all these other sorts of nutrients. So that, it was just sort of seemed like a silliness to me. But thinking about it a bit more closely, like, why would someone with a PhD in nutrition think that an adequate diet is something that does not include basic nutrition? And so once you think about that, then it's like, oh, okay, well, there's some sort of corruption going on here. I mean, because that doesn't sound right.
I mean, it's hard to tease apart all the different reasons why so many people who study nutrition have lost their way in terms of the basic biology of human beings and of how food works in the body. I think there are lots of different factors going on, and lots of different reasons why people go down the wrong path. I think regardless of how they got there, we need to turn them around, because the information that's coming out of prestigious institutions like the Harvard School of Public Health and Tufts University, this information is harming people. And regardless of the motivations behind those messages. And so what I really want to do is help people understand that no matter what anybody else is telling you, learn for yourself understand what you think makes the most sense. Try these different diets on for size. If you're still skeptical, try these different diets on for size and see which one helps you feel your best. And I think because we're so far away from the types of experimentation you might wish we had to prove or really strongly support one particular diet being healthier than another over the long term. Those are the kinds of studies that people wish existed. We don't have those studies, and we may never have those studies. But you don't need to wait for those studies. I mean, there's lots of biology, lots of information available to you, and you can do your own experiments. Because even if the best designed study found that 80% of people did better on a meat-based diet than a plant-based diet, doesn't mean it's that you're going to do better on that diet. So I think that I really want to empower people to look beyond the science, actually, to their own wisdom and their own experience, and see what it feels like. Because as you know, when you try a diet that is actually suitable for human health, you notice very quickly, you feel better, often within a matter of days. And so I think everybody deserves to have that experience.
Yeah, I agree. And that's, I think, the same thing. Studies are there to guide us and to inform us so that we can make decisions in our life. But at the end of the day, if you make that decision and you try something and it has a different result than the study says it will, then, well, it's not really applicable. And somebody goes, well, no, but this study says this. And it's like, okay, but my life says something else. And
Right.
I really like the quote from Richard Feynman, the physicist, who said, it doesn't matter how brilliant your theory is, and it doesn't matter how smart you are. If it doesn't agree with experiment, it's wrong. And really the only experiment that matters as to the individual is what happens to us. And we experiment with that. And if it improves our health, then great. And if it doesn't, then move on.
I think that's exactly right. And I think people have more power than they realize in terms of their mental health in particular. I think people don't realize how much control they have over their mental health, because the information that we've been given about how to feed the brain is incorrect.
Mm.
So most of us have been feeding our brain improperly our entire lives. So we have no idea how much better you can feel. Maybe you're not, maybe you don't naturally have a sour disposition. Maybe you aren't, maybe you weren't born to be sort of absent-minded and disorganized. Maybe you have a naturally sunny disposition. Maybe you're naturally somebody who, enjoys, getting a lot done. And you won't know that unless you're giving the brain what it needs. And then you can discover what your personal best actually is.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that brings us into your book, which is Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind, which I think is hopefully going to really open up a lot of eyes. Can you tell us a bit about that? You go into the causes of mental health issues and obviously what to do about it. It is very little known and little understood what the causes of mental health are right now, even in the medical establishment. And certainly I wasn't taught any root cause to any of these sorts of issues when I was going through and doing my psychiatry rotations. It was just, here are these problems and we have these pills that can help, and this is their pharmacology and how they act. So you feel like you're doing something scientific and worthwhile, but in fact it's still very superficial. You're just sort of learning pharmacology as opposed to what is causing this. So what is causing mental health issues and how do we address that?
Right. So like you, I mean, and I did 4 years of psychiatry residency, and like you, I was taught, that sort of the biopsychosocial model of mental illness. So that mental health problems have biological root causes, chemical imbalances that are to be addressed with medication, and that they have psychosocial root causes, things like trauma and stress and your mother, things like that can be addressed with psychotherapy. So I was trained, as all psychiatrists are, to prescribe medications and to offer psychotherapy. And I practiced that way for 10 years. But we never really stopped to think, well, what is causing these chemical imbalances in the first place? And when patients would ask me, what types of chemical imbalances do I have and which medicines should I try? It was literally guesswork and trial and error. So I'd say, well, I don't have any tests I can offer you that can measure your brain chemicals. So we're going to start with this medication right here because you've got some depression. So let's start with an antidepressant and we'll see how that goes. And in some cases, I mean, anybody who's been to a psychiatrist for medication management knows this. It can take a very long time of trial and error approaches to medications. You start an antidepressant, maybe you start an anxiety medication, maybe you try sleep medication. Maybe if those don't work, you switch to a mood stabilizer or an antipsychotic. When you get side effects, you add medications to balance those side effects, counteract those side effects. It can take a year or two to find any combination of medicines that's actually worth your taking. And of course, if you do get relief from those medicines, which most don't, I mean, the medicines can be helpful. They really can. I still use them in my practice. They have their place. And for some situations, they are really important. But for most people, they do not work or they do not help enough. And even people who do get relief from medicines pay a price for that relief in terms of side effects, and often really a lot of metabolic dysfunction, which can shorten life. So I think that, medications, when I'm using medications in my practice, even to this day, it is a trial and error process. So why aren't we stopping to ask, well, what is causing these if there are chemical imbalances in the brain that are responsible, what is causing those chemical imbalances in the first place? And so we do know a lot more than we used to. I mean, even the past 10, 15 years, we've come to understand some of the key features that you see that many mental health disorders, many neuropsychiatric problems have in common are inflammation of the brain, excessive oxidative stress, too many free radicals, and insulin resistance. So those three are really what people in the fields of nutritional psychiatry and metabolic psychiatry, and I consider myself both a nutritional psychiatrist and a metabolic psychiatrist, people in these sort of cutting edge fields of root cause psychiatry, those are the drivers that we're looking at. And so, but then what causes those? So what causes inflammation? What causes oxidative stress? What causes insulin resistance? And lo and behold, if you look at the diet that most of us are eating, you can find numerous culprits that there's lots of good science behind this, that if you're eating kind of a standard diet, you are going to have, without question, excessive neuroinflammation, excessive oxidative stress, and insulin resistance. So might the diet have something to do with it? I think so.
Yeah. So is it just enough to get away from some of these things that cause inflammation, or do you need to go onto a fully ketogenic diet? Is that obviously going to be a major factor to change the energy available to the brain? What are some of the interventions that you find most advantageous to patients?
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked that question because there are different approaches people can take. So if you start with the so-called standard American diet, which is now the standard global diet, and just about any change you make to that is going to be an improvement. So one of the things that I did in the book, which I did very intentionally, I didn't want this to be a book just about ketogenic diets or just about carnivore diets. And the reason why is because both of those diets for most people are going to be a non-starter, right? So most people with mental health issues, if they think, well, the only way for me to have hope in my situation is to try a ketogenic or a carnivore diet, for a lot of people, that's a bridge too far. And so I want those people to know that there's more you can do, that you can start in a different place. And you can work your way towards those other interventions if you feel ready and encouraged by what you've already experienced by simpler interventions. So I kind of walk people through, okay, start here, which is, sort of a 90 grams of carbohydrate per day from whole foods, fruits and vegetables, no grains, no legumes, no processed foods. And start there at kind of a lower carbohydrate diet where you still get to have some fruit and starchy vegetables, so you don't have to give those up entirely, and just have sort of a balanced sort of paleo diet that's lower in carbohydrate, and see how that feels. That alone, taking out all the processed foods, all of the modern agricultural staples, and I even recommend taking out dairy for best results, and bringing your glucose levels down by eating, about 2/3 less carbohydrate than most people eat. That alone, especially if you have reasonably good metabolic health, if you're a younger person or athletic, that might be all you need to do to see really good results. But if you're like most of us and have a significant degree of insulin resistance, which now, about 90% of us do, then you may need to go further. You may need to lower your carbohydrate even further or even try a ketogenic diet. I mean, that's really where a lot of people see dramatic change in their mental health is because when you're on a ketogenic diet, your brain fuel supply is supplemented, and lots of different types of areas of the brain and cells in the brain that have kind of been sputtering along are going to sort of come back online. So when you switch to a ketogenic diet, you're kind of fundamentally changing your brain's operating system. And for most people, that's a life-changing experience to experience that transition.
Mhm.
So, and then I also, of course, and maybe one of the reasons why we're talking is the third diet that I recommend in the book is a carnivore diet, which is usually, depending on how you construct it, is usually naturally ketogenic,
Mhm.
but it has the added advantage of course, being extremely low in plants or plant-free, depending on how you want to construct it. The one I put in the book is plant-free, but you can modify it. And as you know, this for some people makes a big difference when ketogenic diets haven't helped very much.
Mhm.
So there are these different levels of engagement that people can explore. And I think that if people are concerned about, oh, this seems too hard, I could never give up XYZ PDQ. Don't worry about that. Just start where you want to start and find your way. And what I find in my practice is that most people do want to go further because they're so encouraged when you make changes that actually make sense and actually have the power to change your brain chemistry, you feel encouraged to move forward. But if all you're doing is sort of sprinkling more blueberries on your oatmeal and you're not feeling any better, of course you're going to feel discouraged about dietary interventions because those interventions don't work.
Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned about how some people are refractory even to a ketogenic diet but see improvement when they go to carnivore. I've certainly noticed that in a few of my patients, and I don't treat mental health in general, but I obviously have patients that have mental health issues,
Yeah.
and it's everywhere, obviously. And so, that's something that sometimes when I'm counseling people, I mention these sorts of things. I mention your work. I mention Dr. Chris Palmer's work, and say, hey, look, this is something that's actually working for people clinically. This isn't just supposition at this point. There's actually quite a lot of evidence to this. And some people have found they've done ketogenic diets and they still have a lot of anxiety and depression. Jordan Peterson famously was one of these where he went on a heavily ketogenic, nearly carnivore, but still having salads and a lot of fatty meat and things like that. And it helped a lot of his issues, but he still had a lot of anxiety and depression, like to an extent it was sort of crippling. It took him hours to get out of bed. He really couldn't face his day very well. And then his daughter convinced him to just drop the salads, and in 3 weeks it was largely resolved. And he was pretty shocked. He's like, salad was doing this to me. And so I find that very interesting, and I do wonder what's in the vegetables, what's in the greens. I've noticed it myself. And so I haven't had huge mental health issues, but I have suffered from periods of depression, and
Mm.
I was able to sort of get through these things. I've just always been just so busy. That's probably my saving grace, was I just had things I had to do. And I'm like, well, I have to do this. I just have to get it done. And I just sort of trudged through it and got through the other side of it. But I noticed that when I first went carnivore, mental clarity was better, my mood was better, everything was better, and I was doing so much better. I had so many improvements, and I was digging into the research. I was taking some time off from residency to help with a family issue, and so I had time. And I was like, okay, what do we know? What can we prove? And I was spending like 8-10 hours a day just reading studies and asking questions and seeing if there were answers. And so it was great. And I was really excited about this. And my family was very interested in this. They're all academics. They all are interested in basically anything interesting. And so they were asking me questions about this. They started getting interested in it. So my parents gave it a try. And at one point, my mom made a roast leg of lamb. And I think she put every single herb that she could find in the county on this thing. It was completely green. It was just a green log. It was just like, it was like paper mache with leaves. And I was like, oh, Mom, we're not supposed to do, greens and things like that. That they have toxins. You don't want to actually eat those. She's like, no, 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 no. We're not having sides. It's just the lamb. It's just the lamb. I was like, right, but there's vegetables on the lamb. And And she's like, no, 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 but she just really just thought this didn't count because it's on the meat. And I was like, well, you can tip cocaine in coffee and just say, no, it's just coffee. It's just coffee. I don't do cocaine. And so she ended up doing that, and we had it. And I was a bit miffed, and I didn't really want to eat it, but I didn't want to be rude, and I was a bit self-conscious. And I was like, do I scrape it off? And I was like, oh, that would look weird. And so I just said, let's just eat. Let's just see what happens, and see what the effects are. Just run a little experiment. And I just started getting a bit more upset and a bit more disgruntled about the things that were being said at the table. I started losing my temper a bit. I started getting a bit agitated and quite upset. And I remember being quite upset. And I remember leaving the table at the end of that, going down to the room I was staying in when I was visiting my parents. And I was absolutely beside myself. I was so upset. I was over it. I really decided that I did not want to be alive anymore. I did not want to be on this earth anymore. I didn't want to deal with this. And I was actually planning out my suicide. And I was actually thinking of the way I would do it. And something opened up in the back of my head that just said, hold on a second. Nothing has happened that should make me feel like this. But I do feel like this. This is how I feel. And so that's when I realized this is pathological. Something was wrong with my brain chemistry. Something was going on and affecting me in a negative way. And so I was like, okay, we'll put that on hold, try to sleep, and wake up in the morning. And if I still want to end things, I'll do it then. And I woke up in the morning, thankfully did not feel that way. I was sort of emotionally numb. And I thought, what in the world was that about? Was I just completely overreacting what was being said, or was there something else that happened? Was I being infected? Was it those damn plants? And so I just thought about it. I said, okay, well, let's run the experiment again. I had some more of the lamb, and I was bloody depressed the rest of the day, but I knew why now. And so that was fine. I was just upset. I'm like, okay, that's that stupid garbage. And so, but that just reinforced my plan of just never eating anything green again in my entire life. And, I've noticed that in a few other people, but I often wonder what in the world was in there, because I was just so upset. I've never experienced anything like it.
Had you ever had, as part of your depression prior to that, had you ever had suicidal thoughts before?
Nothing necessarily seriously. That was probably the most serious contemplation of it that I'd ever had. However, I, at a number of times, just did not want to be around anymore. I'd be on a plane traveling somewhere and thought, wouldn't it be nice if this just didn't ever land? If this just,
Yeah. Yeah.
if we didn't make it to the end of this run. And so I've had those thoughts, and I've had similar sort of thoughts, and then like with morbid grief, I've had thoughts about wanting to, when a dearly, loved family member passed away, I just wanted to sort of just end things and go with them, and didn't, but that was more grief than depression. But this time, I think it was far more real. It was far more visceral. And I mean, I was actually planning it out, and I was like, this is how I'm going to do it. And then that something clicked. It was just like, what the hell's going on? There wasn't, the family member didn't die. Something horrible didn't happen. I didn't just lose my life savings in the stock exchange. This is not right.
What's interesting to me, many interesting things to me about that experience, which is a horrifying experience, and that I'm sorry you had to go through. But I'm glad that you had the presence of mind to think, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. But what I find interesting about that is that you had feelings along those lines before, but never to this degree of intensity. And so what I've noticed myself in my own practice and in my own personal experience is that when people are pure carnivore, completely plant-free, and I did that myself for 8.5 months a while back with only meat, seafood, poultry, water, no tea, no coffee, no spices, and salt, right? I did 8.5 months, never felt better in my entire life. But I was in a situation where I was traveling to speak at a conference in Mexico, and I didn't have total control over my food. So I had something, I had like some sort of, similar to your experience. I had some chicken, but it had some herbs on it, or it had been soaked in something, who knows, what it was. I don't remember anymore, but it had some sort of an herb coating. And I had a 3-day severe migraine. I've never had anything like it before. I was in tears on the plane coming home. I was in so much pain. And similar experiences also during that period of time when I was strict carnivore. If there was any transgression beyond my control, I would have severe side effects, overreactions to those plant foods that in the past, yes, those plant foods would have bothered me, but not to that degree. And so I do find it interesting when people have these very severe, exaggerated responses along the lines of things that, I'd had migraines before, but nothing like that. So I think that speaks to, and perhaps the fact that when you stop eating plants, completely stop eating plants, that some of the systems in your body that haven't been used for a while to detoxify those plants have gone quiet. And so I wonder what you think about that. That's just a theory or hypothesis that I have that sort of makes sense in my mind. But how do you put it together? How do you think about that experience, from the way that you think about plant versus animal foods and how they can affect us?
I totally agree. These are toxins, and we get tolerance towards toxins. And just like if you drink alcohol every day or every week, you'll build up a tolerance. And if you stop drinking for a while and you try to drink the same amount, you're going to know about it. And so I think that will give a much larger, more exaggerated response if you have this out of your system, because your body's just not used to it and you don't have a tolerance built up, which, you may not want that big exaggerated response, but at the same time, is it better to get the exaggerated response from drinking alcohol, or is it better to, infrequently, once every 2 years, or is it better to have low grade exposure to this toxin that's actually could potentially cause chronic disease and build up and inflammation and all that sort of stuff? So I still like the abstinence side of things. I still like feeling better all the time. And if some plants get in my system, I at least know about it. I just know why that's going to bother me. It didn't blindside me like it did that night. The next day I was severely upset, but I knew why, and that was okay. And so I could just go and do other things and not be around people to be a grouch at them and cause problems. I think the other thing too is that we get used to feeling so good that the contrast is quite noticeable when we go back to that. And it's just this stark, like, what the hell is going on here? And I think the combination of those two things, the lack of tolerance and the stark contrast, is quite shocking sometimes. Hey guys, just want to take a second to thank our sponsor, Carnivore Bar. I don't promote many products because honestly, all you need to be healthy is to just eat meat. For those times that you're out hiking, road tripping, or stuck at work and you want a nutritious snack that is just meat, fat, and salt if you want it, the Carnivore Bar is a great option. So I like this product not because it's just pure meat, but also because I want the carnivore market to thrive as well. And the more we support meat-only products, the more meat-only products there will be available in the mainstream. So if this sounds like something you'd like to get behind, check it out using my discount code Anthony to get 10% off, which also applies to subscriptions, giving you 25% off total. All right, thanks guys.
Yeah, you know what else is really, I think, useful about this story is that imagine you are somebody who does have things wrong in your life, right? You didn't. Everything was going well for you. So you were able to look at that situation and think to yourself, this depression is coming out of the blue. It doesn't make any sense. Everything in my life is going well. Now, that's not true for most people. Most people have, things not going well, maybe a relationship issue or a work issue or something with, something in your family or finances, whatever it might be. You've got something stressful going on in your life. and you're depressed because of your diet, the human mind is really excels at meaning making, right? So you're
Yeah.
going to look at that situation and think, oh, this must be because I'm having trouble in my marriage, or because my son is having trouble in school, or because I failed that exam, or whatever, or because I'm broke, whatever it is. And you're going to make sense out of it. Or you might even think, well, it's because of something bad that happened to me a long time ago. So we'll create the reason for the depression, and then we will work on that, right? So we'll work on the marriage. We'll work on whatever the problem is. We might even go to therapy. We might even go to therapy for years, trying to deal with what we are imagining to be the root cause of the depression. And it's not that those things can't cause problems. Of course they can. Stress and difficulties in life, of course they can. You're not going to feel, on top of the world when there's a serious issue going on in your life that needs your attention. But I think what's been so surprising to me doing this kind of work is how much of those very real stresses in life, how much less effect they have on you when you are eating properly.
Mm.
So if you're eating properly, you have, and I've heard this from countless people, it's as though you have a cushion or a buffer around you where you can stand back and you can look at that situation and you can appraise it um, uh, from a standpoint of, this is a difficult situation. What am I going to do about it? As
Mm.
opposed to, wow, this is a difficult situation. I need to end my life. I can't tolerate this. I don't see another way out, right? And I've seen this so many times. Uh, for example, worked with a patient for several years with severe food addiction and mood disorder, was having difficulty in his marriage, and went on and off a ketogenic diet multiple times because it's hard to stay on a ketogenic diet, especially if you have certain types of food addictions. And so every time he went on the diet, the suicidal thinking went away. Every time he came off the diet, it came back. And his wife was there through both of those stages, and his wife wasn't going anywhere. So I think that when you see this occur in your clinical work, and when people experience it and share it with you, it just completely changes the way you think about how the brain, what a huge impact diet can have. It's not going to change the situation for you. You still have to deal with the situation or live with something from your past with very real trauma that has harmed you. But what people tell me is that the trauma or the stress or whatever it is that's going on there, it's not right here all the time.
Mm.
They can push it off to the side, they can look at it from a distance, and they can kind of manage it. And sometimes they can even work better in therapy on that problem because they can actually function through it and see it with fresh eyes. So I think it's what you're sharing is so important because you didn't have any problems in your life. So it's actually a kind of a beautiful experiment in a certain way, right? Your life was going really well. And the only difference was from one day to the next was that the land was coated with herbs and spices. And as you know, herbs and spices are very concentrated sources of some of plant chemicals that can be sort of aggressive. And so I think that what you're sharing with people is I think pretty illuminating, and you can use that maybe as if anybody's listening who is a little bit unsure about trying this way of eating. Again, do your own experiment and see if you already have some depression, anxiety, attention issues, memory problems, whatever it is, how much of those problems might be due to your diet. And the only way to answer that question is to find out for yourself. See what's possible for you. If your depression doesn't go away, okay, then maybe it wasn't your diet. But I will say 8 or 9 times out of 10, it is. And so I don't have a randomized controlled trial to tell you that. I just have hundreds of patients that I've worked with to tell you that. But I think it's really worth a try.
Yeah. Definitely. It's funny you mentioned that about the spices, because my mom actually got me for Christmas a book called Most Delicious Poisons, and it's all about the different spices and how these are actually the most toxic part of the plant, and that's why it has such a strong flavor. Our brain is
Yes.
that sends a signal, and our brain sees that chemical, and your brain just goes, "No, don't eat this." Then that's why it's a strong, strong flavor. Get this out, spit it out, and it was a very funny take on that. I thought that was good. You mentioned processed foods as well. What in particular about processed foods is so harmful? Obviously, we can process foods in many different ways, and ground beef is processed foods. What is it about the ultra processed foods that actually makes them harmful?
Yeah, so one of the things I explore in the book is I kind of let's process the word process,
Mhm.
and because anytime you do anything to a plant or animal, you're processing, right? If you're chopping it up, or if you're cooking it, or if you're fermenting it, if you're whatever you're doing to it is processing. Most animals don't process foods before they eat them; they just swallow them. But we do all kinds of things to our food first. So the difference between good processing and bad processing, I think, or acceptable levels of processing versus unacceptable levels of processing, is whether that processing brings a net risk or net benefit to human health. So one could argue that certain foods, especially if, depending on the source, might need to be cooked to be safe in case there might be bacteria on the surface, or that if you cook, especially plant foods, if you cook them, you can make some of their nutrients more available to you. You can make them somewhat less toxic. So fermenting can, again, make certain nutrients more available and make plant foods less toxic, that sort of thing. So those sort of traditional processing methods that we've, been using for long, long period of time, there was a logic behind those. They were making those foods less harmful, more nutritious to us, or they're making them more shelf stable, right? So, for example, salting and curing.
Right.
So that type of processing could be beneficial, depending on the food. But modern processing methods, that require industrial plants and factories and things like that, that level of processing is all risk and no benefit. So what you're doing with processing, especially when you're creating a refined carbohydrate like a sugar or a syrup or a crystal, or you're creating a refined fat like vegetable oil, what you're doing is you're essentially stripping that source food of all of its nutrients and concentrating the most harmful ingredient. And so it's one thing to eat a piece of fruit or a root vegetable. It's another thing to eat pure sugar that comes from a root vegetable like a beet. It's one thing to eat a nut that has some linoleic acid in it, which is the omega-6 fatty acid, which is so high in vegetable oil. It's another thing to pour concentrated source of linoleic acid over all the food you eat. Mayonnaise and salad dressings and marinades and things like that. So this degree of processing is all risk and no benefit. So the signature ingredients, there are many potentially harmful ingredients in processed foods, emulsifiers and stabilizers and thickeners and all kinds of things and flavors and colors. But the lion's share of what we really need to worry about in so-called ultra-processed foods are the refined carbohydrates and the refined fats.
Mhm.
So I think the vegetable oils, the sugar, the flour, the cereal products, the fruit juices, all of those, and this is, I say this in the book, this is, if you do nothing else, please at least remove those, because refined carbohydrates and refined vegetable oils are direct and powerful promoters of inflammation and oxidative stress in the brain. So these are what are disrupting our brain chemistry. These are what are destabilizing our brain chemistry, causing the neurotransmitters to go out of balance, causing the brain to be damaged from the inside out, causing these advanced glycation end products, these kind of sticky, dysfunctional molecules. If there's too much sugar in your brain, that will caramelize very important proteins and other kinds of components in your brain and gum up the works. And your brain's immune system will try to clear those away by mounting an inflammatory response and generating free radicals to deliberately create oxidative stress. So if you're eating this way 3, 4, 5, 6 times a day, which now most people are, which is, heartbreaking, or maybe I should say brain breaking. This is really dangerous. And most people eat this way. Most people are destroying their brains from the inside out without realizing it, and then wondering why they don't feel well. Why it's not just 1 in 4 people, at least in the United States anyway. I don't know the figures for Australia, but 1 in 4 people in the United States now have a diagnosable mental health disorder, serious enough to interfere with their ability to function. And among people from 18 to 25 years old, it's 1 in 3 now.
Wow.
So this is really serious. And it sounds so horrible and so dire, but it's also really empowering, because if you know what's causing it, you have it in your power to undo it. And it's not easy, but it's simple, and it doesn't cost you anything. In fact, will save you money in the long run. And within days to weeks, you will notice a difference. And I think it's really, really worth it for people to understand how exactly those foods, I spell this out in the book because I don't want it to be mysterious. This is how this works. And so if you can picture that happening, every time you're pouring salad dressing on your salad that's, loaded with soybean oil, every time you are eating, a cookie or a bowl of cereal or a sweetened yogurt, imagine your brain under attack every time you do that. And so the less you do that, the better off you'll be.
Yeah. And yeah, well, that's just very good advice for anyone. Just you cut out those ultra processed foods and those specific, the ultra processed carbohydrates, refined sugars and carbs and seed oils. As far as linoleic acid goes, the omega-3, the omega-6s and polyunsaturated fats. I mean, obviously, this is what people have been telling us to eat for 50 years now. This is what you are supposed to eat. You're supposed to get rid of saturated fat. And you're supposed to eat these unsaturated fats. Why are these so harmful? And when these good, wonderful humanitarians all want us to eat it.
Yeah, it's just a marvel of marketing to me. It's just when you look at the truth about vegetable oil and linoleic acid, there's no question that this is not only completely unnecessary molecule to be taking in any amount. We don't need a single molecule of linoleic acid. We are told that it's an essential fatty acid. It is not essential. We're told that we need to eat linoleic acid, which is the nut and seed oils are very, very high in linoleic. Many of them are very high in linoleic acid. We're told that that's good for us, because it's not saturated. We could go down that. We could talk about that for a half an hour. But not just that it's not saturated, but it's actually essential and good for you and will reduce your risk for heart disease, right? All ridiculous. And so the reason why it's ridiculous is linoleic acid. Let's look at what it is. It's a very long polyunsaturated omega-6 fatty acid that is naturally found in small amounts in all plant and animal foods, really, right? So it's widespread. We are equipped to be able to see a small amount of it, but we certainly are not equipped to sort of be pouring it all over all of our food all day long. So linoleic acid is a very fragile fatty acid, which you basically look at it the wrong way and it falls apart, right? So it's oxidative stress. And so if you've got any oxidative stress going on in your body, that's going to oxidize the linoleic acid. And then that leads to a chain reaction of further oxidative stress. So it itself is becoming more and more oxidized, as are the molecules around it. So you get this chain reaction of oxidative stress, free radicals running amok. You can think of them as like little bulls in a china shop that are kind of randomly damaging everything they bump into. And this is not good. So now this is pretty new science in terms of looking at the potential dangers of linoleic acid. Is a relatively new field. But before I get to that, we come back to why they say it's essential. So why are we told this is an essential molecule? We're told it's essential because we need it to build arachidonic acid. Arachidonic acid is an omega-6 fatty acid that the brain actually needs. That's the fatty acid the brain actually needs. And arachidonic acid you can get from animal foods. So if you're eating animal foods, you do not need to eat a single molecule of linoleic acid. If you're not eating animal foods, okay, maybe you might need linoleic acid, but you don't need very much, first of all. And second of all, if you have too much linoleic acid in your diet, the very early science is beginning to show that that linoleic acid does cross the blood-brain barrier. It gets absorbed into the brain just like any other polyunsaturated fatty acid does. So the omega-3s obviously have to cross the blood-brain barrier. So do omega-6s, because the brain needs omega-6 in the form of arachidonic acid. When the brain absorbs linoleic acid, it seems to really not know what to do with it. So instead of turning it into arachidonic acid, which is why we're told we're supposed to eat it, the vast majority of that linoleic acid gets burned for energy. You don't want that. The brain is not supposed to be burning fatty acids for energy. The brain is supposed to be burning smaller molecules, not these long fats that create a lot of oxidative stress and inflammation in the process of chopping them up. You want small molecules like glucose and ketones to be burned in the brain. When you burn too much fatty acid in the brain, you will get excessive inflammation and oxidative stress. So again, you don't want this. Now, I think that since there's no earthly reason to consume linoleic acid, wouldn't you want to play it safe, even though the science is still emerging about how dangerous this actually is and what problems it might actually cause? While you're waiting for all the scientists to figure this out, why not just take it out of your diet? It's an ultra refined oil that comes from oil refineries. There's nothing natural about it. I put in the book exactly, if you wanted to try to make this at home, how you would attempt to do this in 13 easy steps that require, by the way, an explosive solvent named hexane. So you really be careful that, you could have a serious kitchen accident if you tried this at home. This is not a natural fat. It has no flavor. It has no color. It's not a food. And if anybody's really curious about linoleic acid and vegetable oils and how we got here to this ridiculous upside down view of fats, if you haven't already read Big Fat Surprise by Nina Teicholz, it is a wonderful exploration of the science and the politics and the history of how we got here.
Yeah, and Nina's great too. I've had her on the podcast as well, and it's always just a joy because she was on the other side of this. She was plant-based for a long time, and then she started doing a story, and then she started digging into it and going, "Oh, damn it, okay, well that was all wrong." And like a good journalist would, they start pulling at strings and try to see where these leads go and see why is this sweater unraveling so quickly. Like, okay, let's figure out why that is. So yeah, no, Nina's great. And I just think about that, about the, the omega-6s going into the brain. You have a lot of mayonnaise on something, you do a salad dressing, and that's just all going to your brain. And, what is that doing to your brain? It's not going to be good. You're just dumping a lot of oxidative stress and damage to the brain. And obviously, it's not going to be a positive thing. And I think you can get studies that say anything, but there are certainly studies that say that there are higher levels of mental health issues in the vegan, vegetarian, plant-based communities. That could possibly be why they're just exposing themselves to more of these omega-3s and other oxidative substances. Is that something that you've come across? Is that a correct statistic that plant-based people have more mental health issues? Is that something you've come across as well?
I don't. I am very careful when I talk about this because I don't think we can really say that.
Yeah.
I think that the information about, comparing the mental health of people who eat quote unquote plant-based diets versus meat-based diets is very poor quality. And so it's a lot of epidemiology. There's never been a trial, an interventional trial experiment showing that if you take somebody who's eating sort of a standard diet or even a whole foods meat-based diet and you switch them to a plant-based diet or vegan or vegetarian diet, that their mental health declines. And I would say that as a psychiatrist who worked for 12 years in college mental health, 7 years at Harvard and 5 years at Smith College in Massachusetts, up here in the US, I worked with lots and lots and lots of students, many of whom prefer sort of high plant or low meat diets or vegan diets in some cases even. And I have to say that while I did not meet a single student eating a vegan diet who was in good physical or mental health. I'm also only seeing the ones who are coming to me for mental health problems. And I would also say that most of my students had poor health and poor diet, whether they were eating animals or not. So the problem is that the students on campus that I met, and I met many of them who were eating vegan or vegetarian diets, were eating the same junky version of, they were eating just as much junk as everybody else was. It just didn't have any animals in it. So I think, the culture of food on college campuses is atrocious. And so whether you're eating plants or animals, I think in my students mattered less than all of the junk that they were eating. I couldn't tell you, for example, if I had, how they say a whole foods plant-based diet is the best diet for this, that, and the other thing. My students weren't paying attention to the whole foods part of that statement. They were paying attention to the plant-based, and usually not for health reasons. I mean, most of my students were eating vegan or vegetarian diets for compassionate reasons. And so, and they just, because of the messaging that we receive about plant-based diets being healthier, they thought that, better health was just icing on the cake, not something to be sacrificed for their compassionate ideals. But I really do think that is what's happening. And I think that's really unfortunate. And it's really the young people, especially young women, who need to have better information about how these diets affect not only their health, but if they're planning to have children, the health of those children. So this is the most vulnerable population to nutrient deficiencies are pregnant women and developing children. So this is where you don't want to miss out on a single nutrient, not even for a minute.
Yeah.
So during brain development, there are steps there that you may never get a chance to correct. So I think that one of the reasons I wrote this book, and there's a chapter in the book called The Plant-Based Brain, which explains exactly what happens if you don't have animal foods in the diet when the brain is developing, to try to help people understand how dangerous this is. And you don't hear that when in mainstream messaging about plant-based diets. You never hear the ifs, ands, and buts about vegan diets. It's safe if, it's safe, but it's safe. And so this is a very, very slippery slope. I think people need to know what the risks are so that they can make informed choices.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad you said that, because you hear these things bouncing around. And I've seen some things, but like you say, they're epidemiology, and I just
Right.
and that's what I wanted to sort of see. Obviously, this is your field, so I always wanted to ask that of a psychiatrist who actually knew the study. So that's different, and I think that's very fair. We just don't have the experimental data to really say one way or the other. I mean, I certainly feel worse when I eat plants. My mental health is clearly affected by that, but certainly not for everybody. It's so good that you point out. They don't talk about the if, ands, or buts. I was just talking to someone about this the other day, and they were saying that they had a horrible reaction to. It was actually a patient, a horrible reaction to these veggie chips, and they've been mostly carnivore, and they had this big reaction to that. So there's that sort of that thing again where you had this big reaction. But she was really, really unwell. She did not feel good. She ended up having to leave this party, and she didn't know what was going on. She ended up looking up these veggie chips, and she found that there were these tapioca powder that was in, and there's a sort of a rash of these apparently with those veggie chips and the tapioca powder. Apparently it had a much higher level of cyanide in them that than they normally should have. And apparently they had something
than they normally should have. I love that.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, that was the thing. The WHO said that up to 10 milligrams of cyanide was okay. Right. And so it's like, okay, well, this bag of chips had like 160 or something like that. So it was much higher. But that's the thing. No one says that 10 milligrams is enough and say, hey, this bag has 10 milligrams of cyanide, 1 bag per day only as per the WHO, and you meet your maximum cyanide requirements. We're like, whoa, what? That no one's going to eat that. No one's going to buy that. But it's irresponsible not to say that. And we have these different toxins that we know about, that we can quantify, that we can say causes harm at this line. And the WHO says causes harm at this line at 10 milligrams. And yet no one says that. It doesn't say people down. They're designed to be highly palatable. They're designed to be addictive, and just you want another chip and another chip and another chip, and you down bags of these things. So it's designed to have you surpass that threshold, and no one tells you about it, which I think is extraordinarily irresponsible and pretty scary that happens.
It is. And so in the fruits and vegetables chapter of my book, I talk about cassava in particular as being a food that I wouldn't call it a food. I'd call it, this is, that it is dangerous. And it depends on the source and it depends on the amount. But why would you want to expose yourself to any amount of cyanide? Yep. Cyanide is a mitochondrial poison. Why would you want to do that to yourself? And you don't always know how much is in the product. And I tried to understand it. I put this in the book. Some countries have different thresholds in terms of how much cyanide is allowed to be in their cassava products. Every country's different. So depending where you live, you might be getting products that are not as safe as some other ones. I really do consider cassava to be one of those products that people should avoid if they want optimal mental health. And so when I'm designing these diets in the book, the paleo and keto and carnivore diets, I modified them to be, I can call them quiet diets because they're not, with the exception of the carnivore diet, they're not plant-free. But the paleo and the ketogenic diets they're free of, for example, cassava and nightshades and the things that have neurotoxins in them to the degree that I think they're worth everybody avoiding. So these diets are quieter. They're quieter on your gut. They're quieter on your immune system. They're quieter on your mitochondria, your nervous system, your thyroid. And helping people understand that not all plant foods are created equal. So if you're going to eat the rainbow, you will pay a price because some plant foods are more aggressive than others. And if you understand the difference, you can make your own choices and you can do your own experiments. See, well, how do I do with nightshades? I don't think anybody should eat cassava. How do I do with flaxseed? Flaxseed, you grind up flaxseed, you also get trace amounts of cyanide. And people who are honestly care about their health are putting flaxseed in their smoothies. They're sprinkling it on top of their cereal and putting in their yogurt, without realizing that there is some perhaps cumulative risk involved. It's hard to know exactly how these foods will affect you unless you remove them. So, and I think again, I like to say, because I work with all different kinds of people and will help anybody optimize the diet of their choice. I'm nutritionally pro-choice. I just want people to have the right information so that they can make an informed choice, understanding the risks and benefits, and then going in with clear eyes and knowing that, okay, if you prefer not to eat mammals, or any animal, mammals is a different story. I think that's you don't have to eat mammals. You can eat other kinds of animals to get your animal nutrients. But if you prefer not to eat animals, here are the risks involved in that. And then you can decide what's most important to you and make your own choice.
Yeah, absolutely. So we touched on different clinical trials and the lack thereof, but and you talk about in your clinical experience that this had benefited so many people. But we've also conducted some clinical trials as well in nutrition and how that affects mental health. Is that correct?
So I co-authored a study in 2022. I did not conduct the study, but I put the study together and analyzed it with some help from Dr. Eric Westman and Dr. Laura Saslow, who have a lot of experience publishing science papers. But I pulled together all of his information and wrote the paper. And I'm really, really pleased that this paper has gotten as much attention as it has, because people need to understand what happened in this study. It really, I think, if more people knew about it, I think it would be it could bring some very positive attention to the power of dietary intervention for mental health. So my friend and colleague, Dr. Albert Janat, he's a psychiatrist in Toulouse, France, who's been practicing psychiatry for more than 35 years now, and has worked largely with people of North African and French descent with serious chronic mental illnesses. And so some of these patients he's worked with for decades. And so what he decided to do, he had witnessed a family member improve within just a few weeks on a ketogenic diet in terms of autism symptoms and epilepsy, became seizure-free on a ketogenic diet and reduced symptoms of autism substantially. He thought, again, this diet seems to be good for the brain. Could this diet help my patients, some of my patients who aren't getting better enough or haven't responded to all of the medications that I've been prescribing and the psychotherapy and hospitalizations? I've been using every tool in my toolbox to help these people, and they're not getting better. Maybe this could help. So he invited 31 of his most treatment-resistant patients with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, severe major depression. These were patients with taking an average of 5 psychiatric medications, not at all unusual in the chronic mental illness field. In the cases of chronic mental illness, you often see multiple medications prescribed. So an average of 5 medications, and they had been in treatment with Dr. Janat for an average of 10 years, some of them 30 years, right? So he invited 31 of them to come into the hospital voluntarily to try a simple whole foods, mildly ketogenic diet under his supervision in the hospital. And 28 of those 31 patients were able to stay on the diet for more than 2 weeks, which is what you need to do to start to see the changes happen. So 28 of those people continued with the study. And by week 3, after about 3 weeks, and this is what we see in clinical practice all the time, after about 3 weeks, all of them had improved. All of them had improved, regardless of the nature of their diagnosis, the duration of their diagnosis, the number or type of medications they were taking. And 44% of them achieved clinical remission.
Wow.
From serious chronic mental illness. And this, that's why I thought it was worth publishing. And this was not a randomized controlled trial. He didn't divide his patients into 2 groups and compare one against the other. So, we can't say, technically, from a scientific standpoint, we can't say that the ketogenic diet was directly responsible for these improvements. That's why we need randomized controlled trials, which are in the works already around the world. But what we can, but these were all patients who had been hospitalized 1 or more times before in this very same hospital or a sister facility in the same region that uses the same protocols under the care of this very same psychiatrist, and had never seen results like this before. So we'd like to think that the ketogenic diet had something to do with it. And quite a few of those patients opted to continue some version of that diet even after they left the hospital. So I think that this is something that gives people hope. I mean, most people who are in situations like that believe that they have already tried everything, and their doctors think that they've already tried everything. But there are some very powerful interventions available that most people have never tried. So I think it'd be great if more people knew about that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'll put a link to that study in the description as well as a link to your book, and which I think is just absolutely fantastic. And I really love the work that you've been doing. I've been really looking forward to talking to you. And so this has been absolutely wonderful. So just a last question before we go. What do you eat these days? Carnivore for a while, and you said that made you feel really good. What is a good doctor's diet these days?
Well, so never go by me, right? I'm always experimenting with my diet, but I'll share a few things which might be useful to your listeners. So one is I did very strict meat, seafood, poultry, water, salt for 8.5 months, several years back. I felt my best. I lost weight more easily. I've always had trouble with my weight my whole life, and felt amazing. I did have very strong and severe reactions to when the diet got interrupted for whatever reason, which were disabling in certain cases. But beyond that, I think anybody who's watching who already knows something about me knows that I have a lot of food sensitivities that make sticking to any diet, especially when you're traveling, very difficult. So for years, I had difficulty with beef and pork. And so traveling was difficult to find poultry or seafood, depending on where I was going. This was the issue in Mexico. So just finding simple, plain sources of those foods and to get enough fat when I was traveling was challenging because I, don't eat lard or bacon or anything like that. So, and I don't eat dairy or eggs because I have sensitivities to dairy and eggs. So it was really challenging. And at a certain point, I thought, this is just too difficult. I want to expand my diet a little bit. But I will be honest with everybody. When I expanded my diet, even just back to my sort of, the few plants that don't bother me in small amounts, I paid a price for that, So, and so I've been gradually narrowing my diet down again. And now I'd say probably 95, 98%, some days 100% carnivore again. But here's something that's changed. And I haven't studied this, so you please don't, try this on your own without consulting with somebody. But I'm 59 years old, and I started estrogen replacement therapy, and my food sensitivities improved tremendously.
Interesting.
A complete surprise to me. And so I'm now able to eat beef and pork if I'm careful, if they're fresh. And so I am gradually working my way back towards a carnivore diet after I finish this. I'm traveling now, but after I finish with traveling, I'm working my way back towards pure carnivore again, because that's what helped me feel my best and keep myself at a healthier weight and just be more productive and happier in general. I don't suffer major consequences from eating my mostly meat diet with a few plants, and I really don't. If I did, I wouldn't include them. But this is why I think it's the value of self-experimentation is so important. Because everybody's going to find that line that works best for them in terms of, okay, what are the risks and benefits if I include these few foods? Does that make my life, is that a better quality of life for me? Because it's socially a little bit easier. When I travel, it's a little easier. And I don't have to be quite so strict. So I've been experimenting with that. And I think overall, what I've discovered is that as long as I can have beef and pork, which make it so much easier, as long as I can do that, I think for me, what may end up happening is that I may go back to that strict carnivore because there was a night and day difference. That's hard to explain if people haven't explored it for themselves, between a low plant ketogenic diet and a no plant ketogenic diet. There is a world of difference. And I may decide that it is worth it for me to cross back over that line again.
Yeah, well, that's great. Well, Dr. Ede, I'm so appreciative of your time. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure. Please let people know where they can find you and find your work and buy your book.
Sure. So I don't know when this is airing, but the book is coming out on January 30th.
Okay.
And so it's Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind. Here it is. I usually have it on display behind me, but I'm at a hotel at a Metabolic Health Summit this weekend. So it'll be published in Australia, New Zealand, everywhere, all English-speaking markets on January 30th. And you can find me. I spend a lot of time on Twitter if you want to ask me direct questions. I have a website called diagnosisdiet.com. Also on my website, you can find a free clinician directory if you're looking for a clinician to help you try a ketogenic diet for mental health specifically. There's a directory, an international directory you can search. And I also teach clinicians, train clinicians, a CME certified training program, teaching clinicians how to use ketogenic diets specifically to help people with mental health conditions. You can find information about that on my website as well. Yeah, I hope some of this information has been useful, and it's been really nice to finally meet you. And I thank you very much for all the interesting work that you've been doing, helping people introduce people to this really powerful intervention and this information. I think can really be life changing for so many people. So thanks for all you do and for inviting me.
You're very welcome. It's been a pleasure, and thank you. I appreciate the kind words. All right. Well, thank you very much. And thank you everyone for watching. It's been an absolute pleasure again. Please do hit the like and subscribe and leave a comment. And please do follow Dr. Ede and get her book. It's absolutely fascinating. Thank you all. See you next time.